Welcome to another episode of Healing Through Love. Each week, we share ideas, experiences, and resources to increase the awareness of domestic and family violence and to empower survivors to grow and thrive. We talk with experts who share their advice, or with people who have experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their journey. This is all about healing through love. And now, here are your hosts, Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson.
The Healing Through Love podcast with Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. During the aftermath of sexual trauma, the residue can affect many areas of your life. Chante Dent shares with us her journey in episode 79.
And that next step could vary. For some people, it's therapy. I did meet with a therapist for a brief period of time. I also had a rape crisis counselor that I met with simultaneously. And I believe, if it's a coach, a therapist, rape crisis counselor, that someone who's knowledgeable in helping survivors of trauma should be that next step. And then obviously your inner circle is extremely important. The ones that you can trust, the ones who can handle whatever is expressed from that survivor. Identify your inner circle if you can.
The Healing Through Love podcast with Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. Hello and welcome to the Healing Through Love podcast. I'm your host, Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com. Healing Through Love is here to help victims and survivors of domestic and family violence find their way back into living a more fulfilling and meaningful life. We interview experts and survivors who share their personal stories and offer advice to those who have experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their journey. As well as the Healing Through Love podcast, we hold annual Pamper Days in Adelaide, South Australia for survivors of domestic and family violence. This is where local businesses come together to pay it forward by providing their services and resources for the day so our survivors can have a much needed day of indulgence. We are always looking for organisations and people with similar values. And so if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can reach out to us at hello@htlaustralia.org. And just to let you know that Healing Through Love Pamper Days have actually gone global. Our next Pamper Day is going to be held in Portland in Oregon in the US. And we have a couple of other places. One's going to be in Singapore. So we're really, really excited about that. And we can't wait to see how these people will share our ideas with their people and see if we can find some similarities or differences and maybe mould the ones here in Australia to, mirror what they're doing. Anyway, my guest today is the lovely Chante Dent, and Chante is going to be discussing with us how we can maintain a healthy marriage after sexual trauma. And, during the aftermath of sexual trauma, the residue can affect many areas of our lives. And one area that Chante, is going to addresses her own marriage and the areas of intimacy and insecurity. A little bit about Chante. She is a personal development and executive coach and a certified emotional intelligence and psychological safety workshop facilitator with Blue EQ. And she is serving on a national and international, she serves national and international companies in multiple industries, including Fortune 50 companies. She is also the founding principal of her namesake firm, whose mission is to help married women live emotionally healthy lives and experience thriving marriages. She also has a book. It's called My Lemonade Recipe, Turning Life's Sour Experiences into Something Sweet. And she shares firsthand experience of healing from sexual trauma. I'm very interested to hear what Chante has to say, because I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and that has affected a whole lot of areas of my life. So I'm really looking forward to Chante's presentation today. Welcome, Chante, and thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Rose. Thank you for having me.
Now, tell me a little bit about why you, I mean, other than your own lived experience of sexual trauma, why are you reaching out to help others to survive, what happens in their lives?
Well, I realized from family members and participants, clients, that when it comes to sexual trauma, for a number of reasons, though we have come a long way in terms of society's perspective, but when it comes to sexual trauma, there are a number of survivors statistically who suffer in silence, literally until the day they die. And that's a hard truth to accept. It's not okay. And when we live life and understand how beautiful it can be, one can only hope that most people will get a taste of that good life. But the truth is, a lot of times when we don't deal or heal from the aftermath of sexual trauma, again, we suffer in silence. And I know what it's like to be on that side. And I've seen in close proximity people who have never, gone through to do the work. And it's a tough situation to be in, living with that pain internally, and then trying to enjoy, other relationships with people.
Yeah, I totally agree about, we sometimes, as a sexual trauma survivor, you want to brush it under the carpet and perhaps, pretend that it didn't happen, and, and the people that perpetrated it against you come up with all these excuses, and a lot of times they aren't prosecuted for their misdeeds, and that can even be even more traumatic, because they, especially if they're a family member, they are living in quite often close proximity to you, and and often family members don't understand why you don't want anything to do with that particular person. Mm-hmm. And that makes it, really challenging to, especially if you, want to keep it secret. And I don't believe that people should be keeping their sexual trauma secret. I think it's very harmful to your mind and to your mental health. I can vouch for that. It's really something that you really need to share, and you need to tell somebody.
Absolutely. And, interesting, Rose, when you talk about with it, family, and there are so many layers. I've, worked with women who chose to talk about it and report. And for the violation that happened with their family, the family is torn apart. The family is split. And that is heartbreaking, because people will choose, who they'll side with. And hearing these stories is heartbreaking. At the same time, you're excited and hopeful and supportive, because the survivor/victim has decided to speak up no matter what. And as you mentioned, there are also those cases when it's your family member who you're going to see that next holiday or that weekend, and you refrain from any level of engagement as best as you can. But if people don't know the details, you can be doomed as the black sheep of the family, or, it said that there's something wrong with you. And then the next layer is, when it is acquaintance rape, where it's someone that someone that you trusted, and perhaps it's not, someone who's a relative, blood related. At the same time, there's the shock factor that manifests, because you would have never thought that particular person, would turn on you or take advantage of you sexually. And so, indeed, there are many layers that causes a survivor to choose not to speak up. And there are situations where, their lives are threatened. If you say anything, will threaten your life, or the life of your close family or friends. And there's also the emotional trauma that comes on when you're reliving and, having to go through that experience again. But you're right, there are so many layers, and we do want all those survivors to speak up and speak out. My first petition would be, even if reporting, is stressful, at least talk to a trusted source so that you can get on track in terms of working through that healing process for yourself first.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I used to, my father was my perpetrator, and I used to tell people about it, thinking that what was happening to me was a normal part of growing up, because, I wouldn't have known, I didn't know any different. So I used to tell people, and then, of course, they wouldn't have anything more to do with us because they didn't want to, be involved or whatever. And when I finally did tell somebody, I was lucky that I was believed, but the fact was that it caused me so many other issues in life because, I think I ran away from home when I was 14, and so trying to live the life of an adult at 14, and you're not even out of nappies or, diapers or anything, pretty much at that time. And it was a really hard road for me for a lot of years until I realized that, I wasn't the one at fault, and the people that did this to me were, my parents, because my mother knew what was going on. I used to tell her, and, she didn't do anything to protect me. So, I still, speak to my mother, but I don't have a lot to do with her because every time I see her, I just want to be really nasty to her because of, what she put me through. And it's something that I've not yet dealt with. So how can people, in similar situations deal with the anger that they still feel after, 40 or 50 years?
Yeah, I often encourage patient clients, participants of my courses. I feel like the first step would be, in terms of releasing any type of anger, is like, what is your natural way of expressing yourself? So an example, when I felt safe enough and comfortable enough to let it all out, I mean, the good, the bad, the ugly, the anger with no filter, it was through a journal, because I've been journaling since I was 8 years old. So that was my level of comfort, to feel safe enough to get it all out without a filter. And if someone's natural form of expressing themselves is through singing, through art, through dance, I would say release it, like physically release the anger in the natural form of expression that you're most comfortable with. And that next step could vary. For some people, it's therapy. I did meet with a therapist for a brief period of time. I also had a rape crisis counselor that I met with simultaneously. And I believe, if it's a coach, a therapist, rape crisis counselor, that someone who's knowledgeable in helping survivors of trauma should be that next step. And then obviously your inner circle is extremely important. The ones that you can trust, the ones who can handle whatever is expressed from that survivor. Identify your inner circle if you can. The one, the two, or maybe three people who can handle what you're experiencing, and they can be a safe outlet. And so I think, yes, extending to connect with a professional if that's a level of comfort for someone, and then just having that quiet time, that act of self-care, to give yourself permission to let out any feelings. I think that's another hindrance that some survivors, depending on the details of their story, where they feel guilty about their response. And no, there's nothing to feel guilty about. Whatever you want to release and express, by all means, give yourself permission to let that out, and not suppress it. And as you move forward through a healing journey, you'll sense alignment in multiple areas of your life.
Yeah, so I guess, that sort of brings us to the point where, after we've tried to do all these healing things, how do we maintain a healthy marriage or relationship after we've been through this sexual trauma?
So that's a big deal, because here's the interesting part. We could work through trauma and not realize there's still some issues until we encounter those issues, right? So I mentioned that because on one hand, we can be proactive and do some work ahead of time. Perhaps someone's not married yet. They're looking forward to getting married or remarried, and they feel like they've gone through that process, that healing process, and that's to be applauded. And so whether you've started on that journey of healing, or if you're just deciding today, okay, I'm ready to do the work, whatever that looks like, I'm ready. Wherever you are in that process, I would say the first step is really being honest with yourself. And similar to what I mentioned moments ago, not feeling guilty because you should feel a certain way or you should respond. I just feel like if you're not responding that way, then no, you shouldn't. Not yet. I understand the goals and the desires of where we want to be, but I do believe acknowledgement is that first step. And so in marriage or any relationship for that matter, is acknowledging when you hit up against a brick wall, like press that pause button and say, wait a minute, I can sense the tension. I can feel the triggers, and I'm not, experiencing I'm not settled, there's no peace in whatever area that is. And for my husband and I, it was in the area of sexual intimacy, and it was not something I anticipated. I really did not. And it just threw me off guard. And, it's hindsight. Well, Chante, it kind of makes sense that, would be a trigger. But I did not anticipate that type of trigger with my husband, especially after doing a lot of the healing work. But the first thing we had to do is talk about it and not act as if it were not a problem. I say, there's, the term what people say is the elephant in the room. We had to talk about the elephant in the room, and it was not easy. And so I won't encourage individuals to do this as if it's the easiest conversation to have. But I do have a term that I embrace, and it's denial can lead to destruction. And I learned early on that if I continue to deny these type of triggers, it can lead to destruction in my marriage on a lot of levels, because my husband, who, thank goodness he was so loving and supportive and kind, at the same time, he would feel as if I'm hurting my wife, like I'm further damaging her. And that was a lot of pressure and guilt on him. And I was in a space where I'm freaking out and triggered, trying to stay calm, but not sure how to. And in those early days of our marriage, I just didn't really have the tools, to figure out, how do I manage this? How do we process with, and, ensuring that our marriage stays healthy as I continue to heal. So we did have to talk about it. And when I say it was not easy, like at the time I was a certified rape crisis counselor. So I went to a colleague and I was like, okay, can we talk? It's not about a client. It's actually, I'm the client today. I'm having issues, intimacy issues. What do I do? And so she was extremely understanding and gave the best advice. And hopefully this could work for someone. She said, I want you to think about when you're triggered during intimacy. And I just thought, oh, that's interesting. And so she says, if you can, just very, blunt conversation here. Is it before, during, after, think about when the trigger transpires? And I said, okay, that's a good point. And she said, that could be a first step to kind of help you prepare, prep, have a conversation with your husband, maybe do things differently. And when it comes to these types of issues, they're so intimate that it by default calls for some uncomfortable conversations, but they're necessary. So it meant that if you have to change positions, lights on, lights off, like different environment, have that conversation. because the goal is creating a space where you can enjoy intimacy. And it doesn't happen overnight. Even after those conversations, I still had moments where I was triggered. And here's what I think was probably the best thing my husband and I could have done. We were in it together in terms of the support and the long-term goal to ensure that this did not taint our marriage. So I say that because there were times where the triggers would manifest, and I had the strength to go to that space mentally in paraphrase, not this time, you're going to be okay. And one of my reoccurring phrase, like I have to tell myself, you're safe, Chante. You're safe. And this is in the middle of intimacy, and I'm having a conversation, within. And sometimes it worked, Rose. Sometimes it didn't. And I learned that that's okay, because he was patient, I was patient, and eventually we were able to have, the remaining of our marriage, because it has been years since triggers have transpired due to, being sexually intimate with my husband. But I will say, when you ask how, it's not a cookie cutter, formula, but I do believe, I know that it has to start with communication, transparent and vulnerable communication, and patient.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, don't be afraid to tell your partner. I mean, if they don't accept the fact that, you were traumatized sexually, by somebody else, whether it be a family member or not, if they don't understand that and, show kindness, patience, then they're not the person for you.
Yeah, that's another problem. That's a whole nother issue.
Absolutely. I mean, if they don't understand it and think, well, you're tainted now because you've been, you've had relations with somebody else, regardless of whether you wanted to or not, and it was forced upon you, and if they don't understand that, or they don't try to understand that, your triggers and what makes you unhappy or what makes you fearful, they're not the person for you. They move on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I know it's a cruel thing, but if you've been traumatized sexually and you're trying to have an intimate relationship with somebody, you can't, if those triggers keep coming up. It doesn't matter how many times you talk to yourself and you say, I'm fine, it's not the same person, it's not the same circumstance, whatever. But if you're still feeling uncomfortable, it's going to bring all sorts of issues mentally to you, and you've got enough to deal with. You don't need all that other rubbish and baggage hanging on to you.
Yeah. And that's important, because we realize no relationship is perfect. And there's also that line, that shouldn't be crossed, because absolutely, if you are with someone who's not empathetic or understanding or even attempting to understand, then, that could be a problem, or it is a problem in and of itself, versus having, a spouse who might not know how to help, but at least they're open and willing to help. What can I do? How can I support you? What can we do, as a couple, or even what can we do individually, so that we can, go through this process, together and come out on the other side.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit about your book, Chante. It's called My Lemonade Recipe.
Yeah, so this book is, it details my story, and it shows this framework and the tagline, which became my life's motto: heal, love, live. And the whole idea is, when it came to sexual trauma, the question that I had to consistently keep on the forefront of my mind is, how can I heal emotionally? How can I love earnestly? And how can I live freely? Like, that was my goal. And so the book really talks about those sour lemons, childhood sexual trauma, multiple accounts, 2 cousins, up until probably like between the age of 5 and 8 is what I remember. And then, as you mentioned earlier, Rose, yes, sweeping it under the carpet. We don't talk about it, and you better not talk about it. If you talk about it, and then the threats come. So you're this little child and you're like, well, I'm not talking about it. I don't want to get in trouble. So it journeys how I went, years suppressing, but still not really able to connect the dots when I lived my life insecure as that people pleaser. I didn't understand that it was derived from these unresolved childhood sexual trauma issues. Well, when I was raped in my 20s, that was a whole different situation. Someone I knew, this experience, this assault ended up in pregnancy. So it was a lot of layers with that story. It was me healing from sexual trauma and navigating pregnancy. Like, what am I supposed to do now? And I went through a wave of emotions and choices and thoughts and ideas. And I finally concluded this child that I'm carrying will be adopted. And so even to this day, I think sometimes I'm in awe of how it all turned out. But the book talks about how I was able to separate the child from the trauma and give this child the type of nurturing and love that it would need in the womb. So, once she was released and placed for adoption, my goal, and when I talk about fighting for freedom, I'm trying to fight for my freedom. I'm trying to ensure that this child is emotionally stable and not having the trauma in the womb. So it was a lot. They say blood, sweat, and tears. It was a lot, blood, sweat, tears, prayer, and all the above. But I was thankfully, through my faith, my family, my friends, navigated through that situation. And this whole process was about me fighting for my freedom, because I didn't know how I would end up being the Chante I could see from afar. I didn't know how I was going to become her again, but I had a fight inside of me that said, one day, oh, I'll be back. I'll be back. And so my lemonade recipe, turning life's sour experiences into something sweet, is a testament that even in the unfortunate situations of sexual trauma, there is a way. And it might not be easy, but there's definitely a way. If we are intentional and if we choose to do that tough work, we can heal, love, and live again.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
It's a long journey. Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
it's not an easy one. I mean, my abuse, resulted in mental illness. I've got 3 types of mental illness that I now live with because of this. Yeah. And so it's quite difficult. And anyone that's been through it will know what we're talking about, because it's sometimes I still think, am I the person that I'm meant to be? Do I still let this trauma rule my life, or am I going the other way? And sometimes you're just really unsure about what your next steps are.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Rose, because interesting enough, as I continue this process and making connections of my own story and then the stories of the women that I work with, I actually saw this trend, because we could all confidently say we've done the work, whether it was therapy or just whatever our tools and resources were, intentionally doing that work to heal from sexual trauma. But then there were other issues. There was the residue. And when you talked about sometimes you're just not sure, I remember, having to connect the dots one day, because especially when it came to my husband or any other relationship, when I talk about like the insecurities, it's like your mind is playing tricks on you. All the little molehills are all of a sudden mountains. And even, for anyone who's a mom, you have children. And so then your brain is already on a whole nother level to want to protect them. And so there were a lot of times where I'm like, I can completely see survivor of sexual trauma filtered through this situation, through that mindset or through that perspective. And sometimes I am 100% okay with it. And I say, hey, that's fine. That's my defense mechanism. And other times I go, oh, all right, how are you going to process that? Because you already know what's flaring up. How are you going to process and ensure that you're not going back into that space of being a people pleaser or insecure about what you heard or insecure about what was done? And so it's having to train ourselves to identify, okay, I can feel it, I can see it. And it might not be like a direct trigger to sexual assault. It could be unrelated, but it's the residue, which, as we said, it affects so many areas of our lives. So if I'm insecure, gosh, what am I going to do about that? How am I going to make sure that I'm not so emotionally unstable? And so this is where I began to entertain the importance of being emotionally intelligent. And to me, that was my deep dive of building those emotional muscles to become more resilient. And, it's just that ongoing process. And it doesn't, we know it doesn't have to be dreadful necessarily. We just need to ensure that we're always aware, maintaining this level of self-awareness so that whatever does manifest, we don't allow it to take over and fully consume us.
Absolutely. Chante, where can people find you if they would like to know more or, get your book or work with you?
Yeah, easiest way would be to visit my website, and all links and resources are there, and that's chantedent.com.
Wonderful. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us today. I think sexual trauma is still not a topic that's often talked about, especially when it's family related.
Yeah.
I know, from an outside member, when being raped, it's more talked about than there is with family stuff. I've got a fly buzzing around me. I think we need to get it out into the forum a lot more, because it shouldn't be brushed under the carpet. It shouldn't be hidden from the world. And we shouldn't be embarrassed to talk about it, because it's not our fault. It's not anything that we caused or manifested or did any of those things. It happened to us. So we need to get, especially family sexual trauma, out into the world more than it is at the moment, because it's just kept silent. It's a silent killer, to be honest.
It is. Yeah, it is. Well, Rose, again, it's a pleasure, and thank you. Thank you for creating the platform. It's easy for people to talk about what needs to get done, and it's much harder to actually get out there and do it. So I appreciate you, and I commend you for creating this platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind words. Chante, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do look forward to connecting with you further if you're open to that.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm looking forward to it as well. Thank you, Rose.
Wonderful. And that's our episode of Talking with the Experts podcast for today. So in a world where shadows often fall in the corners of our lives, there is a beacon of hope. It's healing through love. We're a community dedicated to shifting the awareness of domestic and family violence, transforming pain into empowerment. Every story matters. Every voice can make a difference. Join us as we journey towards healing and love together. Your support, your voice can light up the darkness, healing through love, because everyone deserves a life free of fear. Together, we can make that a reality. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Healing Through Love. You can get further resources, see the show notes, or simply reach out to us via our website at htlaustralia.org. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to your company next time on the Healing Through Love podcast.